Look, another theme that has emerged in this first week, we've talked and we've had calls from you about the budget at your place. We have got the country's budget coming up. We've had, I think, the picture emerging from business, from individuals, from government is that there are real tough times, super tough times ahead. Do we have a strategy to deal with what might be a recession? And as we open up too, we got the word this week, we are opening up our borders. How fast can we get back to business? And is business still punch drunk from the impact of COVID? Or is there a plan? And if there was a plan, will the government listen to the plan, more importantly? Joining us now is the head of one of the country's major business advocacy and lobby groups, Business New Zealand, Kirk Hope, at home, I think, with the COVID, but managing to join us through the wonders of technology. Kirk, mate, good morning to you. How are you?
Morning, Sean. Yep, I had a negative test yesterday, so should be back in the fray pretty shortly, which is good.
All right. I guess you've had a bit of time sitting at home to reflect on what's been going on. Am I right in saying that there are storm clouds gathering on the economic horizon for individuals, for businesses, for the country as a whole?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think if you look at the inflationary environment, it's surged, and you'd say, okay, that's increased prices a whole lot, and then you've got the Reserve Bank responding by cranking interest rates, and they may end up having to do what's called a triple double, which is increase interest rates 50 basis points, because a normal increment in the OCR is 25 basis points. Double is 50, so they might have to do a triple double, 3 lots of 50 basis point increases, which really is going to have an impact and bite into people's ability to buy stuff. And that's what economists are looking at in terms of the recession, that quite a sharp drop off in people's desire and intention to spend money, because they're worried about how much they're going to have to be paying in interest. And just to give you a sense of the scale of that, I was having a little bit of one of my staff asked me about this yesterday. Kirk, what do you think the chances of recession are? I said, shit, I don't know, mate. But I'll have a look at some data that might be a good pointer. So we have roughly $330 billion worth of residential mortgages, both in housing and investment portfolio. Yep. Within the next year, around half of those are looking to be reset. Around half. So $150 billion worth of those mortgages will be reset in the next year. So in an incredibly strong inflationary environment. So you can imagine that is certainly going to have an impact, and no wonder people are keeping their wallets in their pockets, or announcing their intentions to keep their wallet in their pocket because they want to keep the roof over their head.
There's also the danger, and obviously there's a huge softening in residential property prices. The market has turned. I don't know if it's gone negative. We then put some big interest rates hikes on that. And we might have a large number of people ending up with negative equity in their homes. That's got to hurt them. That's also got to have a trickle down or a snowball effect in terms of economic activity.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the things that economists have sort of said is these consumer confidence surveys are diving, and that's exactly what people are seeing. They're seeing the price of cheese go to $20. They're seeing petrol going to over $3, and then they're seeing their interest rates go up. And they've just bought a house, 6 months, a year ago, so they haven't necessarily got all of the upside. I mean, the good news, on two fronts. Do you want some good news?
Yeah, I'd love some good news because I'm feeling pretty down right now. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, look, the economy is still running reasonably hot. Unemployment is low, and the reality is it's going to take a while to fill for New Zealand to be able to attract people back into the country. That is gonna mean that the worst effects of recessions, and it's anticipated if we went into a recession, it would be reasonably short, because there is still a huge amount of economic activity. The government itself has a lot of capacity to boost its spending, and we can get onto that in the budget conversation. But so there's quite a lot of backup ammo, if you like, in terms of if we did have a recession, it's not going to be.
Well, I think there's been a recent quote from Grant Roberts. He says, "I'm not saying we're into a recession, but if we were to have a recession, we'd be in a good position to deal with a recession, which sounds like he thinks we're going to go into recession. And technically, what's a recession? 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, or is that a depression? I
No,
can't remember the rule.
Yeah, no, that's a recession. I mean, I guess I was having a conversation with someone about this. It might have even been you a few days ago, and the reality is, not recession is a word. I guess the way that people express that word in their hearts and minds is, am I going to be able to feed the kids? Am I going to be able to keep the roof over my head if I have one? What happens if the car breaks down? How much financial capacity do I have if suddenly my hours are cut to 4 days a week or 3 days a week because things are trucking down? And the reality is, because unemployment is so low and demand is still holding up, notwithstanding what's going on in the Ukraine and other parts of the world, trade's still quite strong. So, the reality is that you should be able to pick up a job or more hours or something like that relatively quickly.
What are you looking in this environment, which, as we've said, is not that cheery? What does the government do in the budget next week? And I'm also confident that this government may not survive the next election, and I'd hate to think that because of that they're going to do a whole lot of stuff they might not think they get the chance to do. I hope they're looking at the lives of real New Zealanders when they bring out that budget next week.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think they've kind of already announced what their intentions are. They've got about 6 million in the operational and capital expenditure budget. 6 billion, I should say. It's really going to be focused on health and the health reforms and pushing those through. And the second part of it is going and kind of funding the current system, to be honest, because one of the biggest things is we've got a lot of skills shortages in the health system, and because of the pandemic, people aren't getting operations as we know, and various other things. So that's hard. And the second component of the budget, which will be large, is what they intend to announcing their intentions in relation to financing climate change and the transition to an ETS that could see some pretty steep price increases in terms of the way that we currently do industrial processes that emit. So that's kind of their 2 focus areas. I mean, it was quite interesting for some people, people like me, maybe not everybody, but when Robertson did a sort of pre-budget speech to a group of people at Rabobank about a week and a half ago, he kind of showed what sort of headroom the government have, and actually their headroom has increased despite the increased borrowing that they've undertaken. New Zealand had the lowest net debt to GDP ratio in the world at 19%. To give you a sense of what that looks like in other countries, Japan's was around 130. The US is about 100. The UK is about 100. So ours is this is pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Now ours is kind of 30 under the new model, which makes our reporting more consistent with global terms, will be 20 to 30, and that's because they brought some more assets into some classes that shores up the kind of government balance sheet, if you like.
Yeah.
Now, what does that actually mean? It means, as I said, the government has a lot of capacity. What we do know, though, is from what I just said, is that the private sector, or sort of households, are quite heavily indebted in New Zealand, and that's not necessarily as true in other parts of the world. So the government needs to retain that capacity to be able to support the economy if they need to, and we saw that during COVID.
Yeah. Kirk, you had the lunch and the Prime Minister, and you were obviously in isolation. The Prime Minister was isolation. But at the actual lunch in Auckland yesterday was Max Key, the son of the former Prime Minister. Now, I first want to clarify, that wasn't set up by you guys at all. He's a member of he'd bought a ticket for the lunch and everything, and he was there. That wasn't a set-up on the Prime Minister. You'd never do that at Business New Zealand, would you?
Absolutely wasn't a set-up. Actually, it was a bit annoying for us in terms of, our team worked really, really hard on that event. And, obviously that particular question got a few headlines, and I don't really want to talk about it anymore for that reason, because there were some other big announcements.
And that's a saying. You wouldn't have set it up because it actually took the focus off, if you like, the serious stuff that was going on yesterday.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think two things. One, it was a big announcement to bring the border opening forward to 31st of July, really necessary. We need that to start to happen for some of our key industries. So that was a great announcement, and similarly, there'll be pros and cons of the announcements that were made around immigration, and I know you would have talked with many people about it. Look, some pros and cons around those announcements. The long-term signalling tougher, and at the moment, I think the challenge that New Zealand faces down is that we've been closed to migrants for 2 years, and that's become a strong part of our brand globally. And businesses in particular, and the government are going to have to work really hard about to announce their intentions that the borders are open, people are welcome. I mean, if you're going to, for example, pull up sticks on the other side of the world, take your entire family to a far-flung place like New Zealand, which you may not even know that much about if you haven't been here before. To get a job, you want to be welcomed, and I think that's the thing that we've been pushing with the government, is make sure that these immigration policies are welcoming to the people that we need to be coming into the country, because there are
and do lead to the practical outcomes that we're seeking, which is getting certain categories of skilled people in here, getting them to become New Zealand citizens, and upskilling, our population, right?
Yeah, I mean, so if you think about this, right. We've got about 190,000 apprentices in the trade sector and trade segments. We're going to need a whole bunch of people to come into the country to help finish the training for those people, because of course New Zealanders that have been doing those jobs are heading out. Our net migration numbers are quite striking, negative, right? So people are leaving. We're not replacing them at the moment. So we're going to have to fix that gap pretty quickly. Otherwise, even if the government wanted to do, in the short term, fix some of this infrastructure deficit, they're just not going to have the people to do it. They might have the capital, but not the people.
Yeah. Look, another thing, Kurt, we had quite a long session with Sir Ian Taylor this morning. And, man, he's not holding back. He thinks the government, the ninth floor in particular, were pretty dismissive during COVID and during the development of all different aspects of COVID, of anyone from outside who came and tried to engage them, offer them help, and in particular pretty dismissive of business people. Was that your experience during the worst days of the pandemic and the COVID response? He particularly singled out Brooke Barrington from the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet and says we need an inquiry into how the government dealt with COVID, though he did have praise for some aspects, particularly the early days of government response to the pandemic. I want to ask you, as a senior business lobbyist, has the government been as responsive, as open, and as collaborative as it should have been?
I think in the early days, when when no one kind of knew the pace and scale of the crisis, I think the government worked pretty hard to engage with the business community reasonably fully, because they kind of needed to. I think as the shape of the pandemic played out, my observation would be a lot of that engagement was really taking place in a much more structured way.
Bureaucratic way, maybe.
That was my code for that.
Yeah, okay, well, let's just call it like it is, shall we?
Yeah, all right. I would say an example, Ian would have expressed his frustrations around, the processes for being able to travel offshore,
yep.
right?
Yep.
He was able to develop that and needed to do so for his business. I think he made a really, really good point when he was talking to you earlier, that we started at the position that every business is essential. The government started at here's our list of essential businesses, right?
Right.
So there's a big gap, and you've got to address one of the things that it was always going to be difficult to address, that quite significant gap. The other thing I'd say is, and here's some practical examples of how that played out. Businesses who were operating in international markets could see the importance of rapid antigen tests in the way that they were helping limit the spread of COVID within their workforce. Because we'd run an elimination strategy, the Ministry of Health held very tightly to the prospect that we didn't want rapid antigen tests being the determinant of whether someone had COVID or not. Now, the reality is that was never going to happen, because what would happen is if you're in a business, you took a rat test, back under elimination, you're out of the business, you're into getting a PCR test, and then you carry on, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of frustration for the business community saying, hey, we're going to need these rapid antigen tests just to help monitor, to be able to operate, so that we don't need these classifications of essential and so on and so forth. I think more recently, some of the stuff that we've argued about is why, instead of saying just for essential workers, you can come back to work after you have a negative test, why don't you just do that for all workers?
Yeah.
To enable people to manage through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kirk, so when are you back out in the world? Monday or something? How long have you been locked up?
Today. I'm out today.
All right. Have a good one. Thank you for taking the time to join us on the platform. That's Kirk Hope.